And I really wanted to get you on because I recently downloaded some Aries specific astrology report things from, I think it was numerologist.com who gave
Mm-hmm.
that out. And Aries, of course, isn't the only zodiac sign. There are others, and I know that you've done work on all of them. Bless you for that. And I, of course, am more concerned about Aries because that's what I am. Well, in mainstream Western astrology, anyway. In sidereal astrology, excuse me, I am a Pisces, but that's a completely different story. I know you go by
Uh-huh.
the mainstream Western kind, so we'll talk about that mostly. Just a couple things I want to start out with. We don't really have to spend any time on this show uh, discussing and defining specific astrology terms like house, conjunct, sextile, and all the rest of them. If the listeners do not know what those words mean, they'll just have to look them up themselves. And we're going to be doing a more general horoscope kind of thing instead of a personal horoscope. I will not ask you about anything specific about my personal horoscope. I'll try not to. Maybe something may come up, but I've made a resolution not to try to ask people on my show that I interview about that stuff. So, all right, just want to turn the volume up a little bit. Okay, so Kelly Fox, it's a pleasure having you on. I do have your website, new.theastrologer.com. I'll use that as a bit of a guide. So I guess I'll ask you to start off. How did you find out astrology is a genuine science? Please debunk the skeptics who think it's a fraud. And out of curiosity, why mainstream Western astrology and not sidereal astrology, which is the kind that Afin Shamenti of Mastering the Zodiac does, who I've interviewed before. So you got the floor.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for having me on the show. That was a lot of question in a sentence. Uh, so, astrology, I've forgotten what the question was already, but let me just tell you that tropical astrology is really popular in the Western world, and that's because it's seasonal based. So, we really mark the seasons, and so, of course, the very beginning of spring coincides with the first day of Aries, which is called the vernal point, or also the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere. And so it's part of the natural cycles of our world, of our solar system. So astrology really is about, tracking the movement of the planets around the sun, and the cycles of each planet, and then the interpretation of each planet through each sign. And basically, how we do it as astrologers, from our perspective here on Earth, we look up at the planet, and the filter we look at the planet at is through the sign or the constellation belt. And that's basically how it's done. The interpretations are from ancient Greek and Roman mythology. So astrology has been around for a really, really long time. And sidereal astrology, which you just mentioned, is based off the fixed stars. And it's funny that they're called fixed stars because they actually do move. So there has to be a calculation involved and they move very slowly from our perspective again here on Earth. But it's like, so sidereal astrology is based off the stars. And so tropical or Western astrology is based off the seasons. And the debunking and the naysayers and people with opinions about topics they really don't know anything about, I find quite interesting. I think it's just part of human nature. So, why people tend to ridicule something they don't understand is because they're basing the view on sidereal astrology, which is based off where the position of the fixed stars to the constellations. So, what I think a lot of people don't understand is that Western astrology, we base it off the seasons and the natural movement and rhythms of our world. So when you look up through the constellations, and you see that now we're in Aries, but in Western we're in Taurus. That's the reason why. And astrology is just so popular, and it has been popular since the beginning of time. The first known recording of astrology was found on a bone in I forget the year, but it was like 1,000 or two before BC. So it has been around for a really long time. And of course, back in the day before electricity, with the moon, that was the only night light that we had for hundreds of years, thousands of years. So it was really important, the phases of the moon. But now with electricity and the internet, it's like I don't have to go outside and look at the full moon. I can just see it through my computer. So it's like the value and how times used to be has changed a lot to, what we experience now. And there you have it. With astrology, it's first sign of the zodiac's Aries, and you're in Aries. And I know you said that you didn't want me to talk about yours, but it's like I can give you some key points and things about Aries.
Well, you can give key points about everything if you want. It's just that I'm not going to ask you specific questions about my horoscope in general. So you can go about the whole 12 signs or 13 signs, because there's actually 13. They forgot Ophiuchus. If you have anything to say about that, then
there is not 13 signs. There are only 12 signs.
So what's the deal with Ophiuchus then? What's that all about?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It comes up every few years, and basically it's the toe of another constellation sitting between Scorpio and Sagittarius. But there is only 12 signs of the zodiac. There is not 13, and that's never going to change. There is 12 signs of the zodiac. There are a lot of other constellations which we don't include.
All right. So, interesting thing about how like astrology works. I like to get into the science of it, and well, right now we're going through this interesting phase where the planet Uranus is going into Taurus out of Aries, but it's in a retrograde motion, so it's actually going to be in Taurus until November 7th, and then it's going to go back into Aries for a little bit, and then it's going to go into Taurus. And those of us who are Aries like me, I've checked the horoscope on this, and it seems like our financial life is going to be like really spun out of control, either in the good or a bad way, depending on how, I guess, we manifest the law of attraction and all. And it also suggests something about how it like we'll meet new friends and all that when Uranus is in Aries for us. And that was going to happen before it moved into Taurus just a day or two ago, and now it's going to happen again in November 7th. And it's interesting because I've actually had a couple psychics tell me that around the end of this year, like late 2018, early 2019, is when the time I'm going to find my true love girl. And I can't help but wonder if maybe that has something to do with that. And it's very interesting how, because Uranus is in this retrograde motion, that Uranus and Taurus, Uranus, Aries, and Taurus are all like playing around in a way that's screwing around with everybody and causing a lot of confusion. So can you maybe help make sense of this and how it's going to play out in the near future, and also until 2026 when Uranus is going to move out of Taurus entirely?
Absolutely. Oh, my goodness. And so Uranus just moved into Taurus, and that was yesterday. And it's big news in the astrological world, because when an outer planet, and that's Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, even Saturn, but Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, when they change signs, known as an ingress, then it is really, really big news. But the thing is, it's like they don't just keep moving forward from our perspective here on Earth. They don't just keep moving forward in the orbit around the sun. They slow down, and they slow down so much that they appear to be moving backwards when technically the planets don't move backwards. So for sake of sanity, I think, for sake of sanity and just ease, we as astrologers say the planet is moving backwards, but really it's not. So to address what you just said, Uranus, the planet of the unexpected, moves into Taurus, which is stable, steady, solid, all the opposite things to what Uranus is. So it's going to be really fascinating to see these conflicting energies coming together and how that plays out. And we had an earthquake here, what was it, Monday night, and it was just before Uranus moved into Taurus. And of course, Uranus in Taurus, we're expecting volcanoes like the one in Hawaii that might erupt more so, and earthquakes, because Taurus is the sign of the earth. It's an earth sign along with Virgo and Capricorn, but it's also the sign of the earth. So then when you get like the sign of the earth with unpredictability, then voila, what do you have? So I'm hoping that nothing too substantial, but what I will address the retrograde for the end of the year, but what I just want to add here is that also yesterday, not only did Uranus move into Taurus, but warrior planet Mars moved into brilliant and futuristic Aquarius, which immediately these two planets, Mars and Uranus, are clashing. They're forming a square, and all throughout the summer, the Northern Hemisphere's summer, they're going to be fighting it out. And that is because Mars will turn retrograde June 26th. And so that's why it goes back again to throw some more punches at Uranus. But again, it's like the outer planets, the further out the planet, the more of a heavy hitter it is, or the more impact it has on us. So when it comes to battling things out between Mars and Uranus, which is what's going to be happening the next few months, Uranus, I won't say Uranus will be the winner, but it's like Uranus is further out. Mars is definitely the warrior, it's the fighter, it's aggression. And so when it comes in a challenging angle to Uranus, it's very, very volatile and very unpredictable. And of course, you know, during the summer, you throw in some eclipses, and an eclipse, you know, conjuncting or coming next to Mars, the intensity is just mind-boggling of what could happen. But again, it's like Uranus is the planet of the unpredictable and the unexpected. So it's like anything that we might want to predict sort of goes out the window. Now, you'd said as well that Uranus will be turning retrograde. It's sort of like it moves straight into Taurus and then it turns retrograde. And it turns retrograde in August in Taurus. And the date on that is August 7th. Uranus will turn retrograde, and then it will continue backwards until it gets into Aries. And that is November 7th. I'm just checking my calendar. November 6th. Uranus will continue to retrograde back into Aries. So all you Aries, especially you late-born Aries, you're not off the hook yet, because Uranus will continue its retrograde August all the way through January, and then January 6th that will turn direct in Aries. And I'm just double checking my ephemeris here to make sure that it doesn't retrograde again back into Aries, because sometimes when the planets retrograde, they'll hit the same point 3 times. So no, so finally, the final time that Uranus will be in Aries, when it turns direct, it'll turn direct in Aries in January 2019, and then it will continue forward and then move back into Taurus in March 2019. So what that means for all you Aries out there is, and I'm using, again, without a birth time, I'm using the natural house system, which puts Aries on the ascendant, puts Aries at 0 degrees, Aries on the ascendant, anytime you don't have a birth time, and I'm like casting a chart. That is the way to do it. Don't ever set a chart to 7 a.m. or noon. It's impractical. The best way to do a no birth time chart wheel is 0 degree Aries ascendant, which is called the natural house system. So on that note, Andrew, I'm putting your, I'm doing a quick little mini Uranus in Taurus prediction for you. And so using the natural house system, 0 degrees Aries ascendant, Uranus moved into your second house. On a superficial level, it's money and possessions, but when you go beyond that level, it's self-worth. So yes, you were correct. It's like Uranus in Taurus in the second house is all about unpredictability and perhaps instability when it comes to money. And yes, it's either one extreme or the other. And then when it retrogrades back into your first house of the natural house system, then it's very much about your appearance. And yes, the opposite house of the first house is the seventh house of relationships. So, and a retrograde usually means not just redoing, but something from the past. And in this case, dare I say, first house, seventh house, perhaps an unexpected girlfriend from the past might reappear. So I'm just sort of having I'm half joking, half having a bit of fun with you, but it's sort of like maybe somebody comes back into your life, and it doesn't even mean in this lifetime, because a lot of times in my readings, anytime I see a retrograde planet, I do know that it's past life issues that we bring with us into this lifetime to resolve. So perhaps it might be not just an ex-girlfriend that reappears into your life and then you're given the opportunity to resolve and complete something, but it might be someone who you haven't met this lifetime, who comes in from a past life, who you're given the opportunity to resolve something or reconnect, because we all know that anytime a planet's retrograde, especially that dreaded Mercury retrograde, anything that starts with an RE, really any keyword like recycle, renew, redo, re-establish, just put that RE in front of any of the words, and that's sort of how to deal with the energy of a retrograde planet, regardless of the energy of the planet or what the planet is. So Uranus retrograde is no exception. So there you have it. So Uranus, and the other thing is with Uranus retrograde, not only through the northern hemisphere's summertime will Mars and Uranus be clashing in the sky with the involvement of the eclipses, especially the eclipse on July 27th, which is at 4 degrees Aquarius. But we also have Venus, love and money planet Venus turning retrograde October 5th. It turns retrograde at 10 degrees Scorpio, and then it's retrograde all through October and November, and it's forming an opposition to Uranus. So it's sort of like Uranus is really having a go at quite a few planets. So it's like it's taking one step, going for clashing with Mars, and then at the end of the year, it's this opposition to Venus. So what that means is Venus being the planet of love and money, it's not just about relationships, that the fixed signs, because Venus is turning retrograde in Scorpio, Uranus will be it was in Taurus, but also Aries. But really it's the fixed signs this year that have been getting the dose of planetary challenges, let's just say, and the fixed signs being Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. But yes, it will be forming this opposition to Venus, and so especially at the end of October. So if you are born, anybody out there who's born early in a fixed sign, and I'm talking April-born Taurians, July-born Leos, October-born Scorpios, and January-born Aquarians, I'm talking to you. So it's like these early degrees of the fixed signs. It's like Uranus is just like taking it one step at a time and really coming from just unexpected places. So that's the story with Uranus. And the last time that Uranus was in Taurus was 1941. And so we had, and Uranus has this 84-year cycle, and it's in a sign for 7 years, or approximately 7 years, because we've got to take those retrogrades into consideration. So, what was happening 84 years ago? Well, it was, the world was in upheaval, and that's what Uranus is all about. It's upheaval. So it's like we had the Great Depression, and then, of course, we had World War II, dictatorship, and it's like the world changed. And after World War II, it really changed. And then back in the 60s, just thinking about the Uranus cycle, in the 60s, for example, we had Uranus and Pluto conjunct or next to each other in the sky. So think about society then. You've got Uranus, a planet of change and upheaval, and then Pluto, of course, is just the planet of transformation. And, on the flip side, ruler of hell is the mythology of Pluto. So it's like then when you have like not just Uranus coming together, but the heavy hitter the heavy hitters of the zodiac, Uranus and Pluto coming together, things change. So, 2018, we've had some intense eclipses are always intense, but we've had some intense eclipses because the energies of the eclipses have been in fixed signs. And fixed signs, Uranus in Taurus, it's a fixed sign. So fixed signs, the energy of the fixed signs are a little bit different. They're more challenging. And the reason being is because it's like with fixed signs, they tend to dig their heels in, or there's a lack of compromise, or it's really hard to change direction or change course. So this is another concern. It's like, the nature of fixed signs, how are we going to change the course when we need to? And how does Taurus, which is a really stable, steady, solid, practical sign, come together with Uranus? It's like, it's hard to even fathom, like really what's going to happen. But basically, Taurus is the sign of money. So you have unsteady and uncertain financial markets, which is the general prediction for Uranus in Taurus during this time. And again, looking back on history, coming out of the last time Uranus in Taurus, the Great Depression. So it's unstable, unsteady financial markets. And, where are we going with all this? Because Uranus is also about brilliance and breakthroughs. And, the interesting thing I just read up recently about Elon Musk, who's been creating this tunnel under Los Angeles. And I'm usually updated with current events, but this sort of escaped my attention until recently. And I thought, how Uranus in Taurus is that? Uranus being the planet of brilliance, futuristic stuff, science, amazing, innovative breakthroughs, and then Taurus, sign of the earth. And he's built this tunnel that's a couple of miles long so far, but he's aiming, for this underground tunnel under Los Angeles to be about 60 miles long, which will be the longest tunnel that we have. And to transport, and it's not just cars driving through the tunnel, it's basically transporting cars through the tunnel. So, they're hooked up to some mechanism and then they're sort of whooshed through the tunnel along with pedestrians and bicyclists. So I thought that's incredible. That is definitely Uranus in Taurus. That's a brilliant way to use a brilliant way for Uranus to use the energy of Taurus. So it's going to be really interesting. A lot of us are in for a big change. And, of course, Jupiter, the planet of expansion, is in the opposite sign of Scorpio. So it moved into Scorpio last October. So Jupiter is the planet of, well, it's a planet of many things, but one of the things is the truth. And so being in Scorpio, the sign of secrets. So it's interesting that, the hashtag Me Too movement had been coming about. There'd been rumblings before it, but really sort of came about and was exposed in the media with Jupiter in Scorpio. So Jupiter's currently retrograde in Scorpio, and it will be making a very wide opposition, and I say that loosely, to Uranus in Taurus. And I'm giving it a bit more of an orb because, again, fixed signs and outer planets, I'm giving a little bit of leeway. And with all the other planetary involvement with Uranus in Taurus, it's like it's going to be interesting with throwing a little bit of the little bit of Jupiter in there by very, very wide opposition. It's sort of like excess is the key word here. And then with the square to Mars in Aquarius. It's sort of like hold on to your hats, everybody, and let's just see what happens for the rest of the year. So there's a lot going on there.
Yes, there is. And I'd like to go off into the deep end for just a moment.
Sure.
And let's imagine how horoscopes would change dramatically if the way things worked on the world was altered in the sense of finance. Now, like I said, I'm going to go off the deep end here. It has been said, and please people don't get your hopes up or anything, that yeah, there's definitely some sort of a movement out there to try to switch to a gold-backed currency, and then eventually maybe after 10, 15 years or so, switch to a system of no money at all. And one that makes you wonder, okay, if planet Earth does become a planet where we don't use money and actually exchange in other forms of energy, and well, God can only imagine how that's going to work. But we can also only imagine how is that going to change the wording of the horoscopes, because a lot of the horoscopes mention money and finances and things like that. How would you replace the words money and finance if we're going to live on a planet that eventually is going to have no money?
Interesting. I love the concept, by the way, and I can see it's a really good point that you've raised because, I can see it happening already with the birth of apps, on the phone. It's like you just put in your credit card number and then off you go, and, Apple Pay and all the other stuff. It's like you don't need money. Money might be a dirty word, especially with the square to Mars and, the involvement of Jupiter. It's what word would we use to replace money? It would have to be, yeah, that's a good question, actually. I'm thinking because the second house is the house of money and possessions and self-worth. So it's all sort of tied in together there. It could be, I don't know. I don't know what word. Maybe we're going to come up with a new word, given all the changes in what's happening over the next few years with the planetary activity. Um, that's a really great question. It might be, hopefully the word, actually, you know what? Hopefully the word won't be Apple Pay.
All right. So if you really don't want to speculate on an answer, that's perfectly understandable. I've asked some other people this, and they say, well, I can't imagine it because, well, it's not like that's not how it works in the world. So we've had to write the horoscopes to accommodate for the way it works. So, well, things will change. And with that being said, a lot of people are babbling nonstop about the whole Pluto and Capricorn thing that's going on until the year 2024. And the interesting thing that I have pointed out many times is that the Pluto and Capricorn will end at around the same time period. I'm not sure exactly on the dates, but there's going to be another solar eclipse that's going to be going across the continental United States in April of 2024, on April 8th, 2024, which will be the day after I turn 38 and the day my youngest brother turns 30. There's going to be that eclipse going across
Mm.
America. It's going to be in the moving like in the opposite path on the X as the one that came across America in August of 2017, and Carbondale, Illinois, is going to be the crisscross point of those eclipses, where people in Carbondale, Illinois, will be able to see both eclipses. Saw the one in 2017 and the one in 2024. Carbondale, Illinois is also known as Little Egypt. Make of that whatever you will, and I am planning on going there for the eclipse. I can't think of a better place I would want to go, and I can only imagine that the angels and the gods are going to make sure that the skies are going to be clear that day. I did go down to Charleston, South Carolina for the one in 2017, but it was cloudy, unfortunately. Good thing I got
Mm.
to see my nephew, swell
Mm.
consolation prize. So, but anyhow, this thing about Pluto and Capricorn, the destruction of everything that's not in humanity's best interest, just like how it was during the French American Revolution, and how does that tie in with the eclipse that's going to happen April 8th, 2024? Because people have actually said that is when the Illuminati control system should, for all intents and purposes, be gone entirely. We shouldn't have to worry about it anymore by around 2024. That's what the wishful thinkers are saying, but it would kind of make sense if you think about it. If Pluto and Capricorn says what it's supposed to say, do you have anything to say about this?
Yes, a lot. So Pluto and Capricorn, excuse me, Pluto in Aquarius. I was thinking of Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn first, but I'll start with the Pluto in Aquarius. And I was just looking up the eclipse that you were talking about, April 8th, and it is a solar eclipse at 19 degrees Aries. So Pluto in Capricorn, I keep saying that. Pluto in Aquarius, Pluto in Aquarius, the dawning of the age of Aquarius. I believed it really started to come about, the turn of the century, and then Pluto in Aquarius just sort of nails it. So it's like Aquarius is the sign of the humanitarian, and it's all about, we are all one, we are all equal. It's like Pluto in Aquarius will level the playing field, whereas Pluto in Capricorn currently, and especially with Uranus in Taurus as well, it's like not mentioning any names or anything, but it's all about dictatorship. Think back to the last time Uranus in Taurus, and what was going on and why World War II actually started. So now Pluto in Aquarius is all about, the dawning of the age of Aquarius. We're in it. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And so the eclipse in Aries, a solar eclipse, the eclipses are always supercharged, super powerful. Solar eclipse is basically a supercharged new moon. And in Aries, it's like Aries is the sign of the warrior. Aries is the leader. Aries is like the fearless warrior, the brave warrior. It's also about the individual versus the collective. But the Aries and the Aquarius energy are compatible. They get on. So in some ways, it's like, us as fearless warriors or fearless individuals under the dawning of Pluto in Aquarius, it's like we rise up and join together to become the collective and really level the playing field is how I see it. And also it's about, we think that we're in an incredible, the information age now with the internet, but when Pluto moves into Aquarius, it's like science and technology are going to be through the roof. It's things that we can't even fathom at the moment, because the outer planets are all about all of us on a global scale, like the world, the society. And so when it moves into Aquarius, it's this amazing innovation and breakthroughs, and Uranus will still be in Taurus, so Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius. So Uranus and Pluto will be joined again in like planetary rulers. So that's why I sort of gave the example as well back in the 60s. So it's all about cycles. So I wanted to also mention, because I kept saying Pluto and Capricorn, because I kept thinking of January 2020 is, I'm just looking up the dates here. January 2020 is when Saturn and Pluto are conjunct in Capricorn. Now, this is what I'm waiting for, because Uranus just moved into Taurus. I said this summer it's going to be, fighting off Mars and then opposing Venus. But really, January 2020 is when Saturn and Pluto come together at 22 degrees Capricorn. And so it's like I always say, Saturn and Pluto are the two heavy hitters of the zodiac. Saturn is our restriction and our obligations and our karma, and Pluto, of course, is reaches all of us on a global scale. And it's the planet of, when I say change and transformation, it always sounds so light and fluffy compared to what really happens when you go through a Pluto experience. So it's like Saturn and Pluto coming together in Capricorn. Now, Capricorn's the sign of, it's like the sign of business. It's I always say Capricorns are the CEOs of the zodiac. It's like there's no light and fluffy here with this January 2020 conjunction between Saturn and Pluto. It's very, very, it will be very, very heavy hitting and very intense. And it's like we rise up, the masses rise up and demand change, and we demand long-term change. And so that's how I see it tying into, like when we get Pluto in Aquarius, it's very much, as I keep saying, it's like it's leveling the playing field. We all, finally there might be, during the era of Pluto in Aquarius, and I'm flicking through to see if my ephemeris goes far enough into the future to give an end time. Yes, it does. To give an end time of when Pluto will move out of Aquarius into Pisces, and that will be January 2044. Oh my goodness. I used to think that, 2020 sounded so futuristic. Oh no, actually it's because I looked at the retrograde. 2020 used to sound so futuristic to me, and now all of a sudden we're like upon it. Actually, Pluto moves into Pisces March 2043 for the first time in about 250 years. So, and then again, when I don't know, like if anybody's heard of, not just the age of Aquarius, but the ages go for thousands and thousands of years, and the ages actually move backwards through the zodiac. So the age that we had before the age of Aquarius was the age of Pisces. So it was all about, the birth of a lot of spirituality and organized religions during the age of Pisces. And now that we're just in the dawning of the age of Aquarius, this will be about the people. This will be, there's a lot of lingo out there in the internet world, peer to peer. That's what Pluto in Aquarius will be. And the eclipses that come about during that era will be quite fascinating. And the one that you mentioned, 19 degrees Aries, will be incredible. And I'm assuming that would, yes, it affects a lot of Aries, and our Aries anyway are brave warriors, but it's sort of like a lot of our Aries at that time will be stepping right up to the plate.
Thank you. Still having trouble picking the button on this new headset that I've got. So it's wireless, so got to press the button on it to unmute on the earphone. But anyhow, little science behind how astrology works here. Little debate. Does size matter when we're talking about planets? Because it seems like a contradiction here when,
No.
like, we're going to the inner planets versus the outer planets. You would think, well, maybe there is a difference in size, but then when you talk about Pluto, well, that's an outer planet, but it's a teeny tiny outer planet compared to the rest of the outer planets. So one would think, okay, it can't possibly be similar to the other outer planets because of its size. Well, then again, does size matter? So just for the people that are confused about this issue, how does the size of a planetary body affect the nature of the astrology and the science behind how it affects things on the as above, so below level?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because Pluto is such a teensy tiny little planet, way out there. It got demoted, then it got promoted. I believe it's back into the ranking scientifically of the planets. But according to astrologers, Pluto was always a planet and not a planet you mess around with. So the size of Pluto, yeah, it's really fascinating that it has an incredible influence on us here on Earth, and yet it's so far away and it's so tiny. How is that possible? I would just say, like, the example I could use is the moon, and the moon is a satellite to Earth, and its influence on us is on the tides in the ocean and on water on the Earth. And so humans, we're like, 80% or more of water. So, the moon is about emotions, and Pluto is about power and control and obsession and change and transformation. And so if you think about the moon and its gravitational pull on the Earth, I believe that the planets also have the gravitational pull on the Earth, but in different areas of life and in different ways. So they were the characteristics of Pluto. And the mythology of Pluto is he was lord of the underworld, Hades. So it's like, he has to be that far out and that tiny because his influence is so strong. If he was as big as Jupiter and as close as Jupiter, I can't imagine how that would be. It would be sort of scary. It's a scary thought, and one I've never really thought about before. And then, on that note, with Jupiter being, the largest, besides the sun, the largest planet, and of course the sun technically is not a planet, it's a star, but with Jupiter being the largest planet in our solar system, and one of the characteristics of Jupiter is, he's jovial, and optimistic and happy and excessive, and he has all those moons. So it's sort of like it fits in one sense, and in another, it's sort of like, oh, well, thank goodness when I think about Pluto, it's that far out there.
Right, but when we talk about defining these words, I said at the beginning we're not going to get into definitions too much, but this is something that makes for great conversation. What is a planet? It's interesting how if you ever ask a mainstream scientist that question, they will always say, "Oh, we don't really want to go there," because it seems like mainstream science has changed the definition of planet several times, and every time they do, there's controversy because the new definition of planet that they come up with seems to include things that a reasonable person of ordinary prudence would not consider to be a planet. Well, case in point, to show the thing that the conflict here, Akashic Records and Andrew Bartis has said that there are 66 planets in our solar system. When I interviewed John Lear, he said he spoke to a NASA whistleblower insider of sorts who said that there are 40 planets in our solar system. And I told John Lear, well, is it possible that maybe your source knows about the other 26 objects, but by his definition of planet, they're not planets, so he would not include them as planets. So out of curiosity, what do you define a planet as?
That's a great question. And I always say I'm a meat and potatoes astrologer, meaning I do, Sun through Pluto, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, of course, the Earth. And then anything else, around that. From our our technological point of view, and through the mythology and the stories of the interpretations of astrology, it's like that's sort of the meat and potatoes, the basics. But that said, I do use asteroids. They're not planets; they're asteroids in my readings. And the asteroids are this rocky belt between Mars and Jupiter, and the asteroids are the four biggest rocky components in that belt. There's also Chiron. Now, Chiron, the definition of that, it's sort of a bit murky. I will sometimes say planetoid, but really that's sort of skirting the issue. And so it's this planetoid. It's not a planet. It's not an asteroid. It sits between Saturn and Uranus, and it has it's used a lot by a lot of astrologers. Now, technically, the planets are basically rocks and gas. But there's a branch of astrology called Uranian astrology, and they incorporate planets that we haven't, I'll say, discovered loosely based off what you just said, with other people saying there's like 40 planets and whatever else. It's like, but there are Uranian astrologers out there who say there are definitely other planets, given the classification of the planets from Mercury through Pluto. But there are definitely other planets out there, and some of them are assigned to the signs because each planet has a sign allocation, or each sign has a planet allocation, some share. And these Uranian astrologers believe that the signs share a planet because their planet hasn't been, I'll say again, discovered loosely in quotes, hasn't been discovered through the technology that we have at the moment. I'm definitely open-minded, and there's some pretty hardcore Uranian astrologers that there's no discussion. There definitely are these planets, and so I think it will be a matter of time and technology to catch up till we discover these other planets that we have in our solar system that have not been discovered. I can't think of a better word. Viewed, discovered yet with the technology that we have, and they would be made up of different matter. Don't ask me what that is. I have no idea. But it's like the different matter of what these yet to be discovered planets are. Will be very different. And I would imagine that may come about when Pluto is in Aquarius, because, as I said, Aquarius, is the sign of brilliance and breakthroughs in technology and science.
Why, well, that's a long ways down the road, and I guess for the purposes of this interview, we might as well try to stay a little more close to the upcoming near future. And, well, I'm going to go off the deep end a little bit here, talking about some things that we want to happen but haven't happened. Well, yeah, just like the whole global currency reset, we want that to happen, but it seems like it's not going to happen, and we can only speculate all day as to what the astrology says about when that could happen. But another thing that like whistleblowers coming out. It seems like nowadays more and more things are going to be brought to light and such. And it was said that Edward Snowden was supposed to about 2 years ago expose documents that show that 9/11 Truth Movement was right all along, but he didn't. And it came to my attention at the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles that the reason that didn't happen is because the powers that be said that if he does release those documents, then innocent people will be murdered. Well, I think that's pretty sad that he would actually give in to that. I think it's in his best interest to just release the documents anyway and keep a stiff upper lip if they murder people and just keep releasing it anyway. But what do I know? But anyway, the point I'm trying to make here is whistleblowers would be wise, you would think, to look at the stars and astrology to time when is a good time for them to release information. And like if you were to if they were to release something at a bad time, then that increases the possibility of blowback happening to them or to somebody else, like in the case of Edward Snowden exposing documents that show that 9/11 was an inside job of many people, innocent people will be murdered. Is there like any way that whistleblowers can look at the stars and astrology and determine, okay, if I were to blow the whistle and release a such and such at this time, then that it will decrease the possibility of that happening? And out of curiosity, are there any time periods in the upcoming future that you see as being potentially good time periods for whistleblowers to expose information with very little blowback coming as a result?
Yes, that type of astrology is called electional astrology, and it's picking, I always say picking auspicious times to do stuff. So I've picked a lot of wedding dates based off that system. But with regards to big information being released, I'm a very cautious astrologer as well, because the thing is, it's like, even though with electional astrology, you're trying to find the best timing, there's always something. There is always something. Nothing is ever perfect. And without sounding like a negative Nelly, it's like there is nothing perfect. There's always going to be something. So it's sort of like a toss up on, what planetary alignment is better versus another based off the particular event. So in other words, like the Snowden information, I'm sort of surprised to hear that, because, given what he's been through, and how he put himself out there, that now he's sort of doing a turnabout, which sort of, it's sort of like, how powerful are these powers that be? I guess they are. You'd mentioned the Illuminati as well. It's like the Illuminati is definitely Pluto, because Pluto, again, wears an invisible helmet. It's like Pluto has the utmost power and control and does it invisibly. So what would be the best timing over the next few years to release this sort of information? It's hard to say, but I mentioned before January 2020, and this sort of sounds contradictory, because it's like January 2020, you've got Saturn, Pluto conjunct in Capricorn, and they're two really super heavy hitters, heavyweights of the zodiac. But then, on the other side, you've got Neptune in Pisces, Neptune being the planet of lies and deception in one way. And it's sort of forming this loose sextile to Saturn and Pluto. So maybe lies and deceptions being exposed. And I'd mentioned also the hashtag Me Too, and you'd said things coming to light. That's Jupiter in Scorpio. And the ruler of Scorpio, of course, is Pluto. That's why I keep looking to Pluto for these big sort of global changes and things that affect us on a mass level. So, in one way, it's like Saturn represents authority, and in Capricorn, it's like it's well placed in Capricorn. It's happiest when it's in Capricorn, but it still sort of represents dictatorship, and not questioning authority. But when it comes together with Pluto, it's sort of like we can join globally and align ourselves with the type of leadership that perhaps we may want. Although again, like it's sort of like, and then the sextile from Neptune would be very much about creating opportunity, from this sort of long-term thinking if we all sort of join together. But it's in Capricorn, so it's like, well, on one hand, if it was all in Aquarius, it'd be all great and dandy and fine, and we'd link arms and sort of skip along into the future. But because it's in Capricorn, it's like, Capricorn's quite conservative, as is Taurus. So we've got, these planets in these conservative signs. So when are we going to move beyond that? Well, waiting for, as you said, waiting for Pluto in Aquarius, that's too far out in the future. What about now? Usually with these types of things, eclipses are typically the time to do it. But the eclipses lately have been in fixed signs, and that's not a time to sort of make change, because we're sort of stuck in a rut and we just can't move forward. At the end of the year, we've got Jupiter moving into Sagittarius, where it will be through 2019. That's a really nice energy, but it can be dogmatic as well. So it's sort of like, there's always something. There's always something. And, waiting for Jupiter in Sagittarius, that's not heavy hitting enough to make the changes that we really want. It can be influential, but what we really need are like the further out planets to really be aligned, like they are in January 2020. But it's sort of like they're aligned, but is that going to be enough? The eclipse, you'd mentioned the eclipse there. I'm just looking at the eclipse. We do, actually, that's interesting. We do, January 2020, not only do we have Saturn and Pluto conjunct in Capricorn, there's a nice sextile from Neptune, but we've got, we have an eclipse. We have a full moon lunar eclipse in Cancer, Capricorn, 20 degrees. It sits right, wow, that sits right with Saturn and Pluto. Oh my goodness. January 2020 really is a time to look out for, with because I was just saying, like when would be a time to make these huge changes or release huge information that's previously been hidden or secret, which is the Pluto/Scorpio realm. And then with this lunar eclipse, January 2020, along with the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, wow, we talk about intense. I'm just thinking back in any recent history, when have we had this type of intense energy before? I'm just thinking the summer of 2010, we had, let me look at my ephemeris here, we had a cardinal, was it a cardinal cross? Yeah, the cardinal cross of 2010, the summer of 2010. But really, cardinal is the cardinal signs, and that's Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. The cardinal signs are about movement and instigating. But I guess January 2020 would be a time to something's going to shift in a major way during that time.
Well, thank you for getting our hopes up here. And I'd like to now talk about situations that arise when, like, let's say you've, I guess I'll give a personal story here to help make sense of this. If you're in a situation where you've planned something and then you hear a horoscope that kind of runs counter to what you're planning. Case in point, in September of 2015, during that whole Wave X time period, around that full moon lunar eclipse that was going to occur in my sign Aries on I think it was September 28th of 2015. I was supposed to go down to Arizona for a peyote ceremony, and I planned for that a couple months in advance. And I was going to travel. I think it was on the 26th. However, I did not know that there was going to be any problems with that. But then shortly down the line, I eventually heard my horoscope for that saying that I should not travel on that day. Now, rather than change my plans, I decided to ask my angels and guides, please do not allow for the horoscopes to manifest in bad ways for me. Please allow me to get to that peyote ceremony and all the rest of it. And well, unfortunately, it didn't work out as well because I ended up getting pulled over for speeding on the highway, and I knew all along that like transportation laws only apply to people who are using the roads for commercial purposes. I stood up for my rights in front of the police officer. The police officer went ballistic, and the rest is history. I'm not going to get into what happened. It's a long story, but the point is I ignored the do not travel on that day, and I paid the price. Not only that, the flight to Phoenix was actually originally had some glitch in the airplane, which caused me to have to switch planes. It was almost like the gods were trying to make sure that I didn't travel on that day, but I blew it. I took the backup plan and went to Phoenix, Arizona anyway. And then after I was traveling on the highway, I exercised my rights in front of a police officer who cared nothing about rights, and things took a turn for the worse. And apparently asking my angels and guides for help didn't really work out, and it appears that well there was really nothing they could do. They could do something, but even the angels and guides are not are bound to some degree by the fact that your astrological forecast says certain things and you should or should not do certain things in a way, and they really can't interfere to some extent. So for people that underwent what I had to go through, do you have any general advice, or does it all depend on the situation? And when it comes to this, is it in your best interest to change your plans entirely, or ask your angels and guides to make sure they help you if you don't want to change your plans, or how do you go about something like that?
I think always ask your angels and guides and pray really hard. During that time, Mercury was retrograde. So anytime Mercury is retrograde, on top of an eclipse in your sign, a lunar eclipse in your sign, and a Mercury retrograde in your opposite sign, we have to live our life. And this is sort of like the $1,000,000 question. It's like, that there's going to be some hard hitting energy coming at you. What do you do? Do you miss out on something that you really want to go to, or do you, again, it just comes back to asking for help and guidance and protection, of course. But I see the story here with that time period for you. Mercury was retrograde in Libra, which is opposite your sign of Aries. And so that sort of makes the retrograde worse, because opposition always means somebody else, and Libra is the sign of justice, and Mercury is communication. So it's like, in some ways I couldn't have predicted, you're going to get pulled over by the police and he's just going to be not understanding, or there's going to be a miscommunication, or he was going to have something in his head about it. Like that couldn't be predicted. But in hindsight, it's like, I see Mercury in Libra retrograde opposing your Aries sun. The lunar eclipse in Aries at that time is also about somebody standing opposed. And oppositions are, especially like lunar eclipses, supercharged full moons, as if full moons weren't intense anyway, but especially with the lunar eclipse and then the Mercury retrograde. So it's sort of like sometimes I've tried to, and I know other astrologers do this as well, especially back in the day, you try to sort of align yourself with the planetary energies and only do things at certain times. But I have to say, even if you didn't go on that trip and you stayed at home the planetary energies would have gotten you somehow, some way, without sounding scary and crazy. But it's sort of like you can't avoid what's ahead. It's sort of like if they're not going to get you in one way, they're going to get you in another way, which of course then leads to the question, well, is it fate or free will? So that's really a whole topic and show in itself, fate versus free will, and how much free will do we really have with the planetary energies. So they're sort of like they're given to us as guidelines, but it's like we can't step outside of the line because the energy is still in effect. So in other words, yes, you definitely should have gone on that trip. And unfortunately, there was an incident, a couple of incidents that happened, and of course, travel during a Mercury retrograde is the big no-no. And I've done it myself many times, and I've got many Mercury retrograde stories to tell. Like, why did I pick that time to go? Why did I not look? Why? Because again, it just comes back to you can't escape the energies, and there's always going to be something. I could pick a really great time, but then it's sort of like the weighing up, one influence versus another sort of thing. So yes, that was an intense time. A lunar eclipse in your own sign of Aries, and then of course the Mercury retrograde. And it's fascinating, that I've heard over the years. I keep hearing Mercury retrograde more and more. It's sort of like it's come into mass consciousness. The Mercury retrograde. And sometimes, Mercury retrograde doesn't do anything to the individual, and other times, depending on what planets and where it is in the chart that it's affecting you, other times, most definitely, it's like front and center, and it's all you sort of think about because that's what it's dealing or dishing out to you. Now, with regards to the horoscopes, a daily horoscope is a great place to start with astrology, and if written correctly, calculated correctly, daily horoscope should be your sun sign and the position of the moon during that time and what the moon is doing. Or if there are other planets, of course, affecting your sun sign, like classic example, September 2015, Mercury retrograde. Horoscopes should be written where, be careful with communication with other people. And also with the lunar eclipse, it's like in your relationships, there's going to be some intense feelings. So, but really, astrology is so much more than a sun sign and a daily or weekly horoscope, but it is a fantastic place to start to get the foundations and the basics of what is going on. But really, what should be taken into consideration is, date, time, and place of birth, and chart calculation to see where the transits are at any given time. But as I just said, even that would be we're given planetary guidelines, and sometimes, we can't really see, especially when you're trying to read your own chart, what's coming. All I know is time frames of situations when I'm looking at my own chart.
Right. So I'd like to switch gears now, talk about something that's not really astrology related, but you did touch on this in one of the Aries profiles that I read, and I'm sure that the other zodiac signs you have a similar thing. It was you've talked about how an Aries could actually benefit from carrying a bloodstone with and I did buy a bloodstone off Amazon for about $10 after I read that, but unfortunately, my kleptocratic guides once again decided to take that thing from me. Now, I've had some unfortunate experiences with the disappearing object phenomenon, where some of the chips, metaphysical things that I've bought, like chips to put on a phone to prevent the negative energies, and some talismans and pendants, have disappeared. And I was told by some psychic person who was allegedly channeling my paternal grandfather on the other side. My paternal grandfather said that my angels and guides were taking those things from me as basically a way of not only acknowledging their presence, but also telling me, hey, you don't need to waste your money on this stuff. We're going to do the energy for you, so don't bother buying it. So I guess that's why I guess maybe that's why they took the Blundstone from me, because I didn't need to waste my money from it. All the benefits that you said that they're going to give to me in that little report
Mm-hmm.
there, I'm going to get anyway. Well, okay, fair enough. But for those people that would like to get a stone, could you maybe go down the list, all the zodiac signs, which stones work well for which sign, and get into the science behind that? We need to get a 2-hour show in, so you got the floor with this. Take as much time as you need to get into the science behind this and how it works. Which stones do you use for which sign?
Okay, so with the stones seem to be more a part of sidereal astrology or Vedic astrology in particular, rather than Western astrology. And that particular article on the site, I had quite a few people asking me about stones. So I don't typically recommend them, but I thought I'll put an article together and talk about which sign for which stone. So as you said, Aries, bloodstone, and it's helpful with conditions related to the blood and blood circulation and toxicity. So any sort of detox will help you as well with that type of stone. And Aries, Aries rarely lacks courage. But sometimes, when facing with some daunting choice or task, especially now with both Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn forming a challenging square to many brave Aries, it will help with that. Taurus is the sapphire. Oh, and I have to say before I continue, like what's out there, there might be different views on the birthstones. And as I said, the birthstones are really more about Vedic astrology than Western astrology. So Taurus is a sapphire, and it's like, which is important now with Uranus in Taurus, and it helps to ground and to sort of throw off anything that might undermine any sort of stability. So this might be a really good stone to use with, as I said, with Uranus in Taurus right now, because Uranus being so unstable and unpredictable. And so the sapphire with Taurus can also help with sort of motion sickness or any sort of nausea typically. And it helps increase our sense of calm. Now, Taurus is a very calm sign, but sometimes, we all get a little bit rattled here and there, and especially, the next 7 years with Uranus in Taurus, many stable Taurians might be a little bit rattled. So this stone would be very helpful with that. Um, with Gemini, it's a gate, however you want to pronounce that, and it's really helpful for a wide variety of ailments. And Gemini is a very versatile sign that has many interests. So that's why this stone is a good fit with Gemini and the personality of Gemini. Now, Gemini rules the lungs, the shoulders, the arms, the hands. So, this stone is good for anything to do with the lungs, to bruises, to circulation, and any sort of condition that might affect Gemini. It's also good for sort of like, it's good for staying active and nimble, which is sort of two keywords for Gemini. And communication, it's like to regain our voice when we can't speak up. Is another good use of this stone, and sort of resolving any conflict that needs communication or discussion or understanding. Now, for Cancer, the crab, the stone is the emerald, and Cancer is a very emotional sign. They have very, very deep feelings, and the feelings, of course, not just for Cancer but for everybody, affect people on a physical level and a mental level. And so emerald will alleviate a variety of conditions from the common cold to fever, and it will soothe. It's quite a soothing stone, and especially the color of it is quite soothing. And it will also help flush toxins from the body, and strengthen the immune system. And it really just overall helps with emotional stress, and even grief and guilt can be alleviated by this gemstone, providing like a sense of inner calm and tranquility. And with Leo, well, and again, there's a couple of different schools of thought on these birthstones, but with Leo, it's peridot. And I also have that listed for Libra because, again, there's different information with the birthstones. So, Leo is the sign of endurance, and it's a fire sign, so it's very energetic. But sometimes fire signs can feel scattered or stressed. And the other birthstone for Leo is the Onyx. And so this is very good for refocusing and focusing, what's right in front of you. Because sometimes, when there's a lot of stuff going on and fire signs always being on the go, it's sort of like, fire signs can be a little bit distracted or defocused. And so this helps with the focus. So it's like when life's too hectic, the Onyx will help bring a sense of calm and focus. It also helps with broken bones and fractures, and anything to do with childbirth or the reproductive system. Virgo is the birthstone for Virgo is the carnelian, and Virgos are known as the perfectionists of the zodiac. And, when things aren't right, it can be really bothersome for this sign. And so that can lead to any sort of physical ailment, any sort of nervous stress, stomach issues with Virgo. So this stone is to calm things down. And also it's very helpful in protecting against fear and anger, either your own or someone else's. And it's also really good for strengthening self-esteem, because Virgo can be really, really self-critical. So critical of others, but really very critical of self. And then we have Libra, which I've also assigned peridot. So, with Libra, Libra is a very, very social sign. And I want to say the life of the party, but not like party animal, more like Libra has such a large network of people and events that, when you're out, you might be eating rich foods and drinking, which could lead to heartburn, indigestion, or even liver issues. Libra rules the kidneys. And so this sort of alleviates the heaviness of, those sort of conditions. And so so this stone will sort of calm things down when you might be stressed out. And it's also a good stone for inspiration and creativity. Scorpio, the stone here is beryl. And it comes in many colors and many names. And it's interesting because the symbol of Scorpio is not just the scorpion, but it's the phoenix rising from the ashes. So it's fascinating that this stone associated with Scorpio does come in many colors and in many varieties, has different names, which is really quite interesting because Scorpio, of course, is also a very mysterious sign. So this gemstone, it relieves physical conditions relating to the heart and throat, and it's also helpful in building up courage. And so it's sort of like in a time of crisis or, working towards a goal. Scorpio is a very intense sign, and so it's no stranger to tension or stress. And so if life is feeling overwhelming, this stone can bring a sense of inner calm. And Sagittarius, the stone here is topaz. And so topaz it's like topaz, it's, Sagittarius doesn't really, it's not really the sign to hold a grudge. It's pretty easygoing. But if there's trouble forgiving, if you have trouble forgiving someone or letting go of disappointment, topaz can help. And so Sagittarius is not really a sign for stress, but if there is a difficult situation, topaz can be used to stay balanced and calm. It's a great gemstone to use in meditation or higher thinking, which will benefit Sagittarius, who is, a lifelong learner and teacher. The stone for Capricorn, ruby. Rubies are helpful with many issues related to the heart and blood, and it can ease problems concerning fertility or menopause. Capricorn's high standards and expectations can sometimes lead to weakened self-confidence. So rubies increase inner courage and a belief in ourself. Rubies can also heighten passion, and which might warm up Capricorn's cool exterior. And this gemstone, the ruby, will provide an energy boost. And so, it's all about passion, and it's sort of like restoring our inner harmony and vitality. Then we have Aquarius, the garnet, and the garnet's tendency is to increase generosity and altruistic impulses. And Aquarius is the humanitarian of the zodiac, and so this gemstone brings a sense of calm and even in a crisis, and it also increases the passion for finding purpose in life. And then finally with Pisces, with Pisces, the amethyst helps with anxiety and depression and understanding life's profound transformations, which includes death and grief associated with loss. And Pisces is a very deep and sensitive sign, and so this will help to detoxify the mind and body, because Pisces picks up a lot of Pisces can be very much an empath, so we'll pick up lots of feelings from others and sensitive to the environment around them. So this stone will help with that.
Yeah, thank you. I actually wear an amethyst around my neck, even though I'm an Aries. Well, I said I'm a Pisces in sidereal astrology. So these stones that you mentioned for each sign, can you transfer them for sidereal purposes, or does this really only apply to the mainstream Western kind?
I think that they can most definitely be transferred.
Okay, so that's good to know for a sidereal Pisces like me. All right, so let's talk about compatibility with zodiac signs. Now, this is we can go all day with this, talk about all sorts of hypotheticals and all, but basically, in a nutshell, just because you're an Aries doesn't mean you're going to work well with another Aries. There are so many factors that go into it, and also I want to talk about compatibility from a standpoint of let's talk about the Chinese zodiac, for example. 2016 was a rather rough year for me because that was the year of the monkey, and I'm a tiger, and tigers and monkeys don't mix in Chinese astrology, and that seems to be shown also in my family. Out of all the people in my family that I seem to be at odds with the most, I'd have to say it's my father. We've gotten better. It's gotten better in recent times, but it's been more problematic with him. And he is a monkey, so it kind of would make sense that he and I would be at odds because I'm a tiger and all. But then again, this also raises the question: how do you make sense of like situations where it might cancel out, like Sean Margaret Cohen, my number one fan on my radio show, my first ever guest on my show. She is also a monkey, but she's an Aries. So one would think, okay, how do you make sense of that? Do the two cancel out each other, or is it not a matter of canceling out? It's all a matter of like intermingling and making sense of it to try to see where things will work and things won't work. And this obviously is in a relationship standpoint, but when you talk about also relationships, then there's a whole new can of worms as to which sign will work better than others. So I'm asking a lot of questions here, but can you maybe help make sense of this, and also maybe give your take on anything you can about the Chinese zodiac, if possible?
And I don't know a lot about Chinese astrology, well, or definitely not compared to Western astrology. I find it really fascinating. And I know that there's more to it than just the year you were born. I know they have like the hour and the day, etc. Um, but somehow it does seem to work. And I've always wanted to sort of go deeper with being, like the Aries tiger. How compatible is that with, the Taurus ram sort of thing? So I think it's really fascinating. And from what I've seen with each year, when we change years with Chinese astrology and how it has certain characteristics, that's really insightful. So all I really know is, I'm a goat or a sheep. I don't know which sounds better or worse, and all I know that I'm compatible with the rabbit and the pig, and that's sort of all I really know. Would love to know more. And I always think, in the future when I've got more time, I want to sit down and I want to learn more about Chinese astrology because it really is fascinating. But with Western astrology, I can tell you all about that. And it's actually one of my favorite topics of all. And it's a really, really, the sun sign compatibility is a really, really great place to start. And there's sort of like this formula that you can use. When it comes to compatibility, and really what it is, it's signs of the same element are compatible. So the thing to do is, once somebody masters the signs in order, then the next step would be to know what element each sign is from or of. And then there's also something called modalities, or qualities, and that is really, before I'd mentioned the fixed signs. So you've got cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs. But really, the way to start with compatibility is elemental. So the elements: fire, earth, air, and water. So fire signs obviously get on, and that's Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. And then you've got the earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, they get on. The air signs, Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius get on. And then the water signs, you've got Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And they do share certain characteristics. So that's how they're compatible. They understand each other, very similar characteristics. And then from there, you can have the fire signs and the air signs get on, and they're known as the masculine energies. And then you've got the earth and the water signs, the feminine energies, they're grouped together, and they're compatible. So it's like, so you've got the masculine, the feminine, fire, air, and then earth and water. And that's how you group the signs. But then you can sort of break it down even further. Um, and then you've got signs that are two apart in the zodiac are compatible, because typically it's air, air, air and excuse me, fire and air, and then earth and water. And then three signs apart in the zodiac, um, they're not really compatible, so they're at odds or forming a square. Five signs apart in the zodiac, or seven signs apart in the zodiac, um, they're very karmic. The connections between five and seven signs apart in the zodiac, it's known as the quincunx, and it's very, very, um, it's like a mismatch because they don't have anything in common. They're not of the same element, and they're not of the same mode or quality. Signs that are six apart, you have opposites. So opposites attract, and when it's good, it's great, and when it's not, it's not. So And again, it just depends on, and that's just sun sign compatibility. But then when you get into when I'm doing compatibility readings, it's very much the first thing I look for: Sun, Moon, Venus, Mars connections. And if it really, if I had to boil it right down to just a couple of points, it would be Venus and Mars. Venus is love, Mars is passion. That's really like the foundation of a relationship, love and passion. And then everything else sort of falls around it. I was just doing a reading recently, and it was a compatibility, and it was Mercury square Mercury in the synastry chart. Synastry is compatibility, and Mercury square Mercury, and Mercury is communication, and a square is a challenge. So communication challenge, very challenging in this relationship, and like other things looked pretty good except this communication issue. And of course, then you've got the sun, which is the core of who the person is, and the moon is emotions and feelings. You don't want the moons to be at odds with each other either. So there's a lot of factors involved. There was another reading I did very recently, and it was Saturn opposite Saturn. So you'd think, oh, what does it matter without a planets, and how could it be that influential? But it really, Saturn represents long term. It's also authority, but it can be the glue to a relationship when it's in a positive aspect, like a sextile or a trine, but in a negative aspect, like a square or opposition. Saturn can be a real bummer. It can be a real downer. And it's sort of like getting tangled up. Who's the authority and who's acting like the parent and who isn't. So I see a lot of that. When Saturn is at odds in a compatibility or synastry reading, it's like the partner is acting like the parent, or there'll be parental issues that come up because, I'd have to say a large percentage of people, the population, we have parental issues. Our parents are very, very good teachers and trainers, whether they know it or not. So it's like our parents train us from the very beginning, and we take those issues with us throughout our life and into our relationships. And so the other fascinating thing is, like hereditary or family resemblance. There's also family resemblance in charts, in people's astrology charts. And so I see, I've done it. I've had the privilege a few times to have family members. I'd like to do more of it. Family members, and you see the same theme throughout people's charts. You'll see the connections, like family DNA or family hereditary, or the family resemblances astrologically. And I know years ago there was a piece of software that was created. I think it was called Jigsaw, and it was all about put your family information into this software and then see the commonality between family members. And it's really, really insightful. And personally, I've done charts of all my family members like years ago and over the years, and actually manually doing it to see the connections and the similarities. It's so insightful. It's really, really powerful, and it's really incredible to know where you come from. It's sort of like an ancestry, but it's astrology instead. It's the astrological planets.
Thank you for getting into that. Now let's get into something else that seems to be tossed about a lot with astrology, the whole subject of tarot. And you do have a page about it on your website here, Unlimited Love Coaching and Life Hacks with Tarot Advice. Try it free. Well, what exactly is it about the tarot that you specifically do? I personally use the Deviant Moon Tarot whenever I feel the need to ask a question. I use that tarot. It just happens to be, according to some sources, the most popular tarot deck in the world. Deviant Moon is, for whatever the reason may be. That doesn't make it the best or anything. It's just popular for whatever the reason. And there's other kinds, and there's definitely some truth to the ability for tarot to work, but there's different ways to use the tarot. In my case, I just line the 9 tarots around the circle in a moon, and have to check each one before I eventually get to the final answer outcome and make sense of everything. But that's not the only way to do it. So I guess my question for you is, how does one determine what may be the best type of tarot deck for them to fit their specific needs and desires and whatnot? And how do you, what kind of tarot advice can you give in general?
So tarot is fascinating, and I first started studying tarot when I was a teenager. And I've got many different tarot decks. Of course, I'm a professional astrologer. Tarot is just a side interest. The connection between astrology and tarot, well, the major arcana can be related back to some of the signs of and influences of the zodiac, but really, it's a form of divination, whereas astrology is, it's a calculation. So they fall under the same umbrella, but they're very different in nature. I'm fascinated with the tarot. I wish I could do it more often. My focus is astrology 100%. But it's like, how do you pick a deck? I've heard that people are drawn to the deck, and there are many, many decks out there. I know the Rider-Waite is a common deck, and there was another deck that I picked up a few years ago, and it was a training deck, which might sound really funny, but it was a training deck, and it had the interpretation on the actual image of the card, which I thought was great because, as I said, it's been years and years since I've really played around with it. So, yeah, so it sort of will give you the keywords, and I know some people don't do reverse cards, others do. I really think reverse cards can be similar to retrograde planets, the energy, changing direction type of thing. But I've found the tarot decks, and anytime I've had a tarot, excuse me, a tarot reading, it's always been really right on. So it's always really insightful. And how does it work? It's so fascinating, picking a card, and it's representative of the question that you have, in a way that's just so, looking at a situation from a different perspective is what astrology and tarot do together. It's sort of like it helps you sometimes clarify and understand something that you might have already known. And I do say that, these things are for guidance, guidance and insight. It's like we each have the answer, if there is such a thing, but we each have the answer to any sort of issue that's going on. It's just a matter of how do we access that within ourselves. Someone can't give you the answer. It's like we have the answer. We have our own. It's in our DNA. It's in our records. It's like, this will just help guide us. But I think it's really fascinating. I think any sort of divination is incredible. There was a time when I was doing tarot cards years ago. I was doing it with just regular playing cards. I used to do it that way. And the other things, the I Ching is really also good. It's been around for like millennia. It's a long time, very ancient Chinese system. So there is a lot of way to dice as well. That was another thing. I used to actually do things with dice. But I think in all different cultures, there's been lots of divination and lots of things that people have used, like the tea leaves. I just heard recently, the other day, that someone was using coffee beans to divine the future. So there is a lot of ways to do it. I'm fascinated with all of them. I wish I had more time where I could do it. But really, anything that can help provide insight and guidance, I'm definitely all for. I know that there's a lot of, as I said in the beginning, naysayers around, this area of life, divination, any sort of new age occult topics, because they say they can't be scientifically proven. So, but really, life is not just all about proving things scientifically. There's a whole other realm out there that we might not have to prove to believe in or use or help us in our everyday life.
Oh, yes. And do you, out of curiosity, look into numerology in any way? And do you try to?
Yes.
All right, what can you say about that and how it ties into
I
astrology?
Yes, I love numerology and numerologist. I do work with them. Numerologist and numerology, I really like. Again, I'd love to get more into it, but astrology really takes up all my time. But numerology, it's fascinating because numbers have meanings, and adding up, like the letters in your name, each letter equates to a number, and then it gives you a number, like a birth number. It's really incredible, and it's really powerful. And each day will have its own number, each hour, each year. And new cycles begin with one. And the master numbers I'm just fascinated with, 11, 22, and 33. And I knew that the house that I'm living in is 330, and I knew straight away this was the house because of the number 33, because zero you don't count. So and there's a lot of people write me, and they say that they keep seeing numbers, like triple digits, three ones or four ones, or and what does that mean? And I was going through this stage where I was just seeing triple or quadruple digits everywhere. And this period went on for about 2 years. And it was like driving me nuts because I'm like, what does it mean? I know it has this meaning, but what does it mean? And so I was told that it just means you're on the right path. It's a message from your guides. You're on the right path, and just keep going. Stay the same direction and just keep going. You're doing the right thing. And I like sometimes it's like, is it really that simple? Is that really what it is? Or is it sort of more than that? Like, should I know more than that? Should it be more like I'm on the right path and then what? It's like, it just is what it is. The other thing is dreams. In my readings, I do talk a lot about dreams. When somebody, actually this morning I was doing a reading, and this lady had Neptune, planet of dreams, amongst other things, in the 12th house of Neptune and Pisces and dreams. So anytime I see that sort of influence from dream analysis, it's like, pay attention to your dreams. You have this. Usually, people that have really vivid dreams are quite intuitive or even psychic. So it's like the messages come from dreams. So pay attention. There's so many different branches of divination under this umbrella. It's really, really fascinating to me.
Indeed, it is, and there's more to learn every day. Um,
Hmm.
I want to talk about now, like from a perspective of someone who's not an earthling, how they would perceive astrology, because it would obviously be different from their perspective, as we on Earth would see the stars differently than someone on another planet would. Um, I have spoken to whistleblowers who claim that there is definitely life on Mars and whatnot, but that's a whole other can of worms I'm not going to get into. But let's imagine for a moment that those life on Mars did try to use astrology. What would planet Earth symbolize to them? And when you're talking about looking up at the well, first of all, what does planet Earth symbolize? And then also, after you get into that, talk about like can you make sense of is there like a fixed set of rules pertaining to what the sky would have to look like? There's got to be every planet has to have its own 12 zodiac, because that's the way the like the laws of the universe are. It's just going to be different things, different layouts, but it's still going to be the same laws, if you get my drift, throughout the cosmos. Is that basically how it works? So that, and what would Earth symbolize from an astrology perspective, from an outsider?
I'm laughing because I'm equating it back to, it's sort of like you asking, what do other people think of you? Because in some ways, that's how I'm sort of thinking of it. It's like, how do other people see you, and what do they think of you, and how would they? It's sort of like along those lines. So if we were on Mars, how would the astrology be then? That is really that's like mind blowing. That sort of concept that believe it or not, I've never thought about it. Um, there is something called heliocentric astrology, which is putting us on the sun. Okay, of course that can't happen because you just burn if you got anywhere near it. But it's like putting us on the sun and then viewing everything from the perspective of us being on the sun. I've never really looked at a chart that way, or maybe I have, but I can't remember it. But it was sort of like that's sort of the closest I've ever come to that sort of question. Um, Life on the sun, heliocentric astrology, because really the planets, including the Earth, go around the sun, so it makes perfect sense that you would set the chart on the sun. But the thing is, it's like our physical body is here on the Earth, and that's why we do it like the sun goes around us, but we know it really doesn't. So it's like, how would it be on Mars? I just can't even. I'm finding it really hard to even fathom that question. I think I need to think more about that and how that would be. The same rules apply, no doubt. Mars is further away from the sun. So the year, just say, for example, the year is longer, whereas compared to Mercury, the closest planet to the sun, a year on Mercury is 88 days. So, yeah, it's a really, really interesting question. And if you're going to ask me, would I consider moving to Mars? No, not happening. I like it here on Earth too much. And, my whole mindset of what I do with astrology is all Earth centric. So I can't fathom being anywhere else. Actually, I just want to say on that note, there is another branch of astrology called astrocartography, and it is all location based. So, for example, I was born in Australia, which is a day ahead of the US. So all charts are calculated based off Greenwich Mean Time. That was just the 0 degree longitude point on the Earth. And so everything has to be calculated back to Greenwich Mean Time. So, for example, like Pacific Time USA, it's 4:44, and so in 0 degrees longitude, Greenwich Mean Time, or Universal Time as it is now known, that would be 8 hours ahead. So it would be 12:44 midnight on 0 degrees longitude. So then that would cast the chart in a different way. It would put the houses in a different arrangement, and the planets in different houses depending on where someone was born on the Earth. So that is really, really insightful. And here's the other thing. The closer you are born to the equator, the more equal the houses. The further south or north you are born to the South Pole, North Pole, the more disparate the houses are. So, for example, if I was born in Iceland, I might have like some of the houses being just a slither and then other houses being half the chart wheel. I mean, it's so fascinating when someone's born really far north or south to see the difference in these houses. It's just incredible. Yeah, so closer to the equator, the houses are equal. And then, so it's like, and then the other thing to do is with the astrocartography system, well, there's two ways of like calculating different locations on Earth for the birth of a person. So, of course, there's always the natal birth, and that takes priority over everything. But then you've got something called astrocartography, which puts your chart and where the planets were at the time of your birth on top of a world map according to their location. So then you've got all the lines running through different places on Earth. And this is like not just hours of fun. This is like days, weeks, and months of fun, endless amounts of fun if you're an astro geek. And so what it does is it's like you can get really specific with, okay, so I've got a Venus line, because you want to look for Venus, planet of love and money, running through a certain location on Earth. And so you know that if you go to that location, you should have this Venus type of experience. And I remember once I had this conference in Chicago. This is years ago. Conference in Chicago, and I have a Mars line running straight through Chicago, and I was really concerned because I thought, oh dear, like Mars is anger and aggression, and of course I was taking all the negative keywords for the planet because it was just my own fear. And when I got to this conference, it was the best conference I'd ever been to with regards to outcome and success and meeting so many people. And it did change based off people I met. It did change the course that I was on, and it was incredible. So it was sort of like, sometimes, as I said before, you can't read your own chart, and sometimes you put your own filters on what you think is going to happen, and it's completely different. So, just on a side note, it's always easier for me to give readings to people I don't know at all, because there's no filter. I don't know anything about the person. I only know about the chart, and I can read it in a pure way. Whereas I have so many people who I know, oh, what does my chart say? It's like, I can't tell because I only know their situation. It's much better to just read clean, have no connection to the person at all. So back to astrocartography, it's like, it's so fascinating where you can see these planetary lines running through places on Earth and the experiences to be had. And of course, you don't want to go on a vacation where you've got a Pluto line. Again, I'm a cautious astrologer, and Pluto, it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. I'm just only speaking from personal experience of having Pluto transits and how I'll say how transformative or forced change they can be. And so avoiding places where there's Pluto lines. Same goes for if you meet someone. If you meet someone from that place, say my example, a Mars line running through Chicago, I meet people from Chicago, and I've always had a really good experience. So it's sort of the same applies. You meet the person from the place where your planet line runs through, and you have that same experience with people from that place. Now, the other method of Earth-based, location-based astrology, there's astrocartography, but it's like at the same time, say if I was born at a certain time, Sydney, Australia, and then I have to calculate, take off 10 hours. So 10 hours behind puts me to universal time, Greenwich time, 0 longitude. And then that changes the houses of where I was born. So I can put myself, even though I was born in Sydney, Australia, I could relocate to London at that same time, and it might put, a certain planet on the ascendant or somewhere else. So it really, the location is so crucial to astrology. So it's not just the planets. If I was born on Mars, I can't imagine how that would be. But, like different places on Earth and where I would be born. And just another thing with being born in the Southern Hemisphere, everything's reversed. So the calculations of astrology are reversed. So we have to have a little exception in the rule for when there's a calculation for a Southern Hemisphere birth. Of course, thank goodness nowadays for software, because I don't have to sit there with all my books and atlases calculating and making exceptions, not just for the Southern Hemisphere, but also daylight savings time, which used to be the dread for so many years for me, because not just daylight savings time used to be set by each individual county. And then finally, surprisingly, it was not that long ago that there was a universal agreement about daylight savings times, or, nationally, each country came together rather than each county. So the daylight savings issue, and then, during the war, World War II, there was double daylight savings. That was every astrologer's nightmare before software came into play, was not just location, but, the time, daylight savings, and that sort of thing. Oh, and just one other note. In California, the longitude line. Los Angeles to San Francisco. Los Angeles, the sun sets 20 minutes different to San Francisco, but they're still on the same longitude line. So all these little sort of these little calculations and little exceptions and certain rules we can sort of forget about now. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not as astrology's more astrology's more accessible now with software that helps us. I can just enter a date, time, and place in 20 seconds, and then I have the chart wheel. Previously, doing it by hand, I'd have to have all the reference books, and then it would take, I don't know, 40 to 60 minutes to calculate a chart. I mean, the world has changed so much, not just with the internet, but just with software as well.
Yeah, that's a blessing and a curse. I mean, you want to be able to get these answers to these things right away, but then again, we don't want to become so dependent on this that we lose the mental capacity to do it on our own if we had to, like like our ancestors of the past were able to do. They were such experts; they make us look like idiots the way we have to. The way we use mechanical devices and such to get our answers, but they went through all the trouble to get all that. So, it's been almost 2 hours. I guess I'll give you the last few minutes to get out anything you like. You can make a sales pitch out of this if you want to get out to any potential listeners who are going to be listening to this, how they can reach you, what your readings are like, how much you charge, what we're willing to do for so and so, and how it works, and what do you, in general, let's conclude, what do you see for the future of humanity as a whole in the upcoming, not too distant future? You got the floor.
Oh, geez. What do I see for humanity? Well, January 2020 is really what I'm looking to see what happens around that time. And, I liked with Pluto moving into Aquarius. That's going to be really interesting. The age of Aquarius is here. But I offer readings. I even do 15-minute readings for someone who might not have had a reading before or just need a quick little overview, get a taste of it. It's different to having a psychic reading. It's more calculated, tracking the movements of the planets around the sun. So a 15-minute reading, 30-minute, 1 hour. It's just an eye opener, and it offers clarity. And sometimes with my readings, I say to people, we can look to any event in the past, and I can pull up the chart for that, and you can see the transits or the influences that were going on at that time for you. And it can be incredibly insightful just to get a different perspective or a point of view on a situation. So 15-minute readings, 30 minutes, 60-minute readings. You can book the readings on my website, theastrologer.com/readings. And I also have a lot of free astrology reports. So you enter your date of birth and you get some really, really great information. Please sign up to my newsletter, theastrologer.com/newsletters. And I have a daily newsletter, a weekly, and a monthly. And it's not just horoscopes. The horoscope newsletter that I have, I put in the daily overview, the aspects, where the planets are today, and a little note around that. So there's a lot there. Oh, and if you're on social media, I do an Instagram show, live event every Monday, 7 p.m. Pacific time, USA. So what I do on my Instagram live show Monday nights is I talk about the planets, what they're doing that week, and also I take a lot of questions. Any question I will answer. Sometimes I pull up a chart wheel and I'll look at the person's chart. And you can also, which I was really pleased about, somebody can ask to be on my show, and then you can certainly ask the question on my live event, not just through text. But my favorite questions on my Instagram live event are compatibility, and also sun sign, what's happening for Aries this year, and so on. So please join me 7 p.m. Pacific time My Instagram name is Kelli Fox the Astrologer. Kelli Fox the Astrologer. And follow me because I send notices out all the time. I think that's it.
Thank you very much. Very enlightening. I learned a few things myself. Those documents that I got from numerologist.com that you created specifically for Aries were very helpful. I'm may even look into reading them again. Not one of those things you just want a one and done reading. You want to look at it again just to refresh your memory with all these things because it's very, very valuable. Certainly the relationship thing. If I find my mate, see what will be compatible with that. So it was a pleasure having you on. I will try to upload this to YouTube as soon as possible. It's kind of funny I say that because I still haven't uploaded my interview with Winfrey to YouTube. I better do that tonight if I know it's good for me. So, but I got to get his done first before I do yours because I interviewed him earlier. So I will try to get this up before the weekend, and I guess I'll send you a link when I do. So good luck on your future endeavors. Enjoy the rest of your trek throughout infinite consciousness. Pleasure having you on, Kelli. Goodbye and good luck.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for